Welcome to Deep Psyche. Have you ever truly paused to consider what unfolds within your psyche each time you masturbate? Take a breath. This is not about morality, nor the tired old discourse of right versus wrong. What we are exploring here runs far deeper into a realm you may have never dared to enter. What does this private act reveal about your inner world? Carl Jung, one of the foremost thinkers in the study of the unconscious, believed that behind every seemingly ordinary behavior lies a hidden truth. And yes, that includes the moments when you are alone with yourself. It's not merely about pleasure, it's a language, a message, a symptom, above all, a mirror. So what exactly did Jung suggest about acts like this? How does the unconscious interpret a repeated behavior so tied to solitude, sensation, and secrecy? Could it be that you are unknowingly feeding inner shadows? Are you expressing unresolved desires, hidden frustrations, or escaping from something too difficult to face? Before we step further into this symbolic, psychic, perhaps even existential territory, take a moment. Subscribe if you're drawn to deep reflections and inner exploration. Here, we don't settle for surface answers. We look where few dare to look. So, breathe. Hold that thought. Because what comes next might just change how you see yourself and what you truly do when you believe no one is watching. When Carl Jung observed human behavior, he never saw mere isolated actions. For him, every impulse, every repeated habit, every seemingly mundane choice was a doorway into the unconscious, a realm where deeper truths reside, often hidden from our everyday awareness. Masturbation, though common and natural, was not exempt from this symbolic lens. Jung did not view sexuality as something shameful or negative. On the contrary, he recognized sexual energy, what he called libido, as a vital creative force at the heart of human existence. This energy isn't confined to sex. It moves through our dreams, our art, our ambitions, our connections with others. When allowed to flow freely, it becomes expression, purpose, transformation. But when repressed, distorted, or compulsively redirected, it often signals an inner imbalance, a psychological message in need of attention. Within this context, masturbation can be a healthy expression of self-awareness. It can also serve as an emotional outlet for what we struggle to name or face. The key question isn't whether the act is right or wrong. Jung would dismiss that binary. The question is, why are you doing it? Is it a conscious act of desire, a moment of connection with yourself? Or is it a form of escape, an attempt to numb loneliness, soothe frustration, distract from boredom, or silence anxiety? Jung would not condemn the behavior. Rather, he would encourage you to explore it, not with guilt, but with curiosity. The act itself is not the problem. The problem begins when it becomes unconscious, an automatic ritual that avoids rather than reveals, that silences rather than speaks. Sometimes what feels like temporary relief is actually the unconscious whispering for your attention. How many times have you turned to masturbation not from desire, but from habit? How often has it followed rejection, failure, insecurity, or emotional emptiness? This is not about moral judgment, it's about symbolic meaning. In Jungian psychology, one of the most powerful concepts is the shadow, the parts of yourself you reject, deny, or refuse to see. And often, compulsive masturbation can be a way of feeding that shadow. Not because pleasure is wrong, but because it may be masking wounds, unmet needs, or unresolved conflicts. In such cases, what's sacrificed is not just energy, but intimacy with yourself, with others, with life itself. You may be trading moments of comfort for a deeper disconnection, replacing presence with pattern, intimacy with repetition, and the unconscious notices. It tries to reach you through dreams, through anxiety, through creative blocks, through a quiet exhaustion that no rest seems to cure. Jung believed that ignoring these signals is like walking around with an open wound, pretending it isn't there while wondering why it keeps hurting. So the real invitation is not to stop, but to see, to listen, to ask, what is this act trying to say about me, about what I lack, about what I long for? Because healing begins not in suppression, but in awareness. And what begins as a simple habit can gradually reveal itself as a symptom of the soul. This is why Jung constantly invited us to immerse ourselves in the symbolic nature of our actions, to ask the uncomfortable questions, to search for meaning beneath the surface, to recognize significance even in what seems like mere impulse. In this light, masturbation ceases to be just a physiological act. It becomes a mirror, a clear reflection of how we relate to our desires, our inner emptiness, and our most intimate truths. And it's precisely here that the path deepens. Because if this solitary act reveals so much about our shadow, what might it also show us about our relationships, our sense of self-worth, and the ways we connect or fail to connect with the world around us? On one hand, masturbation may expose the hidden terrain of the unconscious, the unmet needs, the repressed emotions. On the other, it may offer a glimpse into our difficulties with human intimacy, our fears of being truly seen. Carl Jung believed that every human relationship is a field of projection. We project onto others what lives within us, especially the parts we have not yet acknowledged or integrated. This isn't limited to romantic or emotional relationships. It also applies to desire, impulse, and the ways we pursue pleasure. When someone withdraws into repetitive cycles of solitary gratification, they may unconsciously be avoiding the most challenging mirror of all: real contact with another human being. Unlike fantasy, where everything is curated and under control, real life introduces uncertainty, rejection, conflict, vulnerability. And that's precisely where growth begins. But it's also where fear arises. Jung reminded us that the other person confronts us with the unresolved contents of our own psyche. Perhaps this is why so many retreat into private pleasure, because it's safer. No one judges, no one demands, no one disappoints. But equally, no one shares, no one welcomes, no one co-creates meaning. It becomes a self-contained world, predictable, controlled, but profoundly isolating. Over time, this behavioral loop may signal an unconscious refusal of true intimacy. And intimacy, from a Jungian perspective, is not merely physical. It's the courage to be seen, to allow vulnerability, to face the unfamiliar, both in the other and in ourselves. Because it's often through the other that our deepest inner material is awakened. Instead, many turn toward fantasy, toward increasingly artificial images and hyper-stimulating content. The danger here is subtle but profound. The unconscious does not distinguish between symbolic representation and real experience. What we consume in secrecy can come to define our emotional truth. Fantasy becomes habit, exception becomes the rule, and slowly our capacity to connect, to touch, to look, to feel begins to fade. We trade the risk of intimacy for the illusion of control. We choose simulation over the unpredictability of real connection. But as Jung often emphasized, what we refuse to confront in the outer world returns as symptoms in our inner world. Loneliness, emptiness, the persistent sense that something is missing. These are not superficial moods. They are reflections of a deeper disconnection, one that begins within and radiates outward. And perhaps more than anything, this repetitive practice is trying to tell us something essential. That there are parts of us crying out for presence. That beneath the surface of pleasure lies a silent call for reconnection with the body, with the soul, and with the other. Because pleasure alone is not enough unless it is rooted in meaning, in relationship, in life itself. And here we touch one of the most vital keys of Jungian thought. That true healing begins not in control or repression, but in integration, in listening to what the unconscious is trying to say, even through our most private habits. Integration. Carl Jung invites us to a path of inner wholeness, a process of integrating opposites, of accepting both desire and vulnerability, both pleasure and affection, both solitude and intimacy. When we can hold these tensions without denial or repression, the act that once felt like an escape transforms into consciousness. It becomes a choice, a full expression of being. But to reach that level of awareness, We must first understand where our impulses come from, how they are formed, and what they are trying to reveal. An impulse doesn't arise out of nowhere. It is a response, a symptom, a form of language. And when we begin to decode that language, a new world opens up. A world where control gives way to understanding, and where pleasure ceases to be an end and becomes a beginning. Up to this point, we've explored what masturbation may reveal about our shadow and our patterns of relating or avoiding the other. But Jung invites us to look deeper still, to uncover the very root of impulse. What we often call will is frequently just an automatic reaction to something unexamined, unresolved. So when it comes to solitary pleasure, the essential question becomes, what's really behind this desire? The answer, more often than not, lies not in the body, but in the psyche. Jung believed that we are driven by archetypal images, symbols that live in the collective unconscious and shape our emotions, decisions, and behaviors. Sexuality in this symbolic framework is not merely physical. It carries the weight of creation, union, vulnerability, transcendence. It is one of the most powerful expressions of the soul precisely because it touches such deep layers of our being. So when someone feels a sudden urge to masturbate, it's worth asking, what inner image is being activated? Is it genuine sexual desire? Or could it be an unconscious attempt to fill a more existential void? Boredom, frustration, loneliness, anxiety, insignificance. These emotional states can often disguise themselves as physical urges, and the body, unable to differentiate clearly, responds in the most immediate way it knows, by seeking relief. But Jung reminds us, relief is not the same as healing. Momentary pleasure may quiet the ache, but it does not address the root of it. It's like applying a painkiller to a wound that needs deeper care. It works for a while, then it doesn't. And when that happens, the impulses grow stronger, the cycle repeats more frequently, and the aftermath, once only slightly uncomfortable, deepens into guilt, numbness, or emotional fatigue. At this stage, many begin to wonder, how can something that brings me pleasure make me feel worse afterward? Jung would answer that this is the result of an imbalance between the ego and the unconscious. The ego, the conscious part of us, seeks quick gratification, wants to avoid pain, and is often blind to deeper emotional truths. But the unconscious keeps the record. It remembers every gesture, every buried emotion, every repeated pattern that the ego refuses to face. And so the real healing begins not in suppression or shame, but in integration, when we dare to turn toward what we've avoided and listen to what the act, the impulse, the body is trying to say. Only then can pleasure be reclaimed, not as escape, but as connection, not as numbness, but as presence, not as control, but as meaning. This is where the true path of individuation begins, and sooner or later, the psyche demands a truer answer. The real challenge, then, is not simply to stop the act itself, but to understand what it represents in your life. What are you escaping from? What is asking for your attention but has been ignored? Which parts of yourself have been denied, hidden, or rejected? When you begin to bring these questions into consciousness, something within begins to shift. The impulse stops being an enemy and becomes a messenger. It's essential to recognize that the act of masturbation in itself is not the problem. The issue lies in the automatism, in the absence of awareness, in using it as a defense mechanism against unresolved emotional pain. Jung taught that all psychic energy, including sexual energy, can be transformed, sublimated. That means it can move beyond being directed solely toward physical pleasure and instead be channeled into creation, self-discovery, in the pursuit of something greater. This process is what Jung called individuation, the journey of becoming who you truly are. By integrating light and shadow, desire and purpose, drive and choice. In this light, every symptom becomes a doorway, every compulsion an invitation, every pain a potential for discovery. Of course, this transformation does not happen overnight. It takes courage to look within. It takes presence to feel what lies beneath the repeated gesture. And it takes willingness to break old patterns and open space for new meaning to emerge. Perhaps at this point, you find yourself wondering, all right, I understand all of this, but what do I do with the impulse now? How do I handle it in a more conscious, mature, and integrated way? Is there a real practice, something practical I can do to turn this cycle that holds me back into a path that sets me free? Yes, there is, and that is exactly where the next step begins, because understanding the meaning of the impulse is only the first step. The true power lies in how you choose to act from that understanding. Now that you see how the urge to masturbate can be far more than just a physical desire, that it can be a symbolic, emotional, even archetypal response, it's time to take it deeper. It's time to transform the impulse into awareness. There is little use in understanding the source if you remain trapped in the same automatic cycle. Real change begins when you decide to act with presence, with intention, with clarity. Jung once said, "What you resist persists, but what you observe transforms." This means that repressing your desires, pretending they don't exist, or punishing yourself for having them only strengthens the shadow. The path forward is not denial, but integration. That is, what you feel must be acknowledged, accepted, understood, and then consciously redirected. One of the first practices that can support this shift is simple, yet profound. Observe the impulse without immediately acting on it. When the urge arises, pause, take a deep breath, and gently say to yourself, "I'm feeling this, and that's okay, but I don't need to act on it right now." This small space between impulse and action, that is where your freedom lives. Because in that gap, you stop being a slave to your patterns and begin becoming the master of your inner world. You don't have to say no forever. You only need to say, "Not now." And in that space you create, use the time to look inward. What was happening right before the impulse? Were you feeling bored, anxious, lonely? Were you avoiding something important? This kind of emotional tracking is essential. It helps reveal the hidden triggers behind repetitive behaviors. More than that, it teaches you how to respond to your emotions with greater emotional intelligence. The second practice is the transmutation of sexual energy. Jung often emphasized the importance of channeling libido, this vital life force, into something constructive, something that builds, creates, and expands consciousness. When the urge arises, try redirecting it toward a creative activity. Write, draw, compose music, move your body, meditate, play a sport, anything that allows the energy to move through you. The energy is there, alive and pulsing within. And if it's not expressed sexually, it can be expressed symbolically with even more power, surprisingly. Many great artists, inventors, spiritual leaders, and entrepreneurs have, often intuitively, learned how to do this. They didn't deny the force of desire, they harnessed it. They turned it into fuel for creation, for achievement, for transformation. And so can you. This isn't about repression or celibacy, it's about mastery, choosing to direct your energy rather than be ruled by it. A third vital practice is self-observation without judgment. Make it a habit to journal, especially during or after moments when the impulse is strongest. Write down everything: your thoughts, bodily sensations, memories, fantasies. This simple act begins to take power away from the unconscious and brings light to what was once hidden. You begin to spot patterns, recognize cycles, and understand the inner logic behind what used to seem like random urges. The more light you shine on the shadow, the less it controls you. Jung once said, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." This is the work, not to become a monk, but to become someone who lives with presence, someone who doesn't get lost in their own impulses, but understands them and guides them wisely. Finally, remember, this is a journey, not a perfection project. There will be relapses. There will be days when you act out of habit without thinking, and that's okay. The goal is not to never repeat the behavior again, but to do it less and less, with more awareness, with more responsibility, with greater freedom. And when you slip, the worst thing you can do is fall into guilt. Guilt paralyzes. Guilt strengthens the shadow. Guilt ties you to the past. What you need is presence, compassion for yourself, a steady commitment to continue moving forward. Every impulse is an invitation to look inward, to grow, to heal. And when you begin to respond to that call with maturity, something profound begins to shift. You realize you're not fighting the craving, you're learning from it. You're being guided by it. You're using this energy as a springboard to become who you truly are. And it's right there, on this path of self-mastery, that real transformation begins. Because what was once just a fleeting pleasure becomes lasting personal power. And so, the inevitable question arises. What changes in you and in your life when you decide to take the reins of your own energy? Taking ownership of your energy is a radical turning point. Until now, perhaps you've been swept along by impulse, habit, the need to relieve tension without understanding its roots. But when you begin to choose, consciously and deliberately, how to direct your energy, something in you matures. And that maturity radiates into every area of your life. Jung reminded us of a profound truth. All psychic energy is one, whether it manifests as sexual desire, aggression, creativity, or spirituality. It is, at its core, the same vital force pulsing through us. And because of this unity, when you begin to master this energy in one area of life, your entire inner system starts to reorganize. Clarity sharpens, focus deepens, self-esteem rises. Not because you've eliminated desire, but because you're no longer a prisoner to it. This kind of mastery is not built on repression, but on redirection, on channeling energy with intention. And that leads us to a crucial question. What might you begin to build when you stop quietly sabotaging yourself? In many cases, the repetitive cycle of compulsive masturbation is intimately tied to a fragile sense of self, to feelings of powerlessness in the face of life's demands, to a desire to escape commitments that feel overwhelming. When you break free from this pattern, you unlock energy to meet life with greater courage. You begin to create. You start taking initiative. You seek real connection. You say yes to opportunities that once intimidated you. The energy that was once confined to secrecy and silence begins to nourish your relationships, your projects, your dreams. It's like an inner dam breaks open, releasing a renewed flow of vitality and motivation. And this, in turn, activates something powerful within you, what Jung called the self. The self is the deep organizing center of the psyche. It is the symbol of wholeness, of your full potential. And as you begin to detach from unconscious impulses and compulsions, you start to align with this center. Unlike the ego, the self isn't interested in fleeting pleasure. It seeks fulfillment, growth, integration, wholeness. At this stage, masturbation is no longer just a physical act. It becomes symbolic. It reflects your relationship with your own creative energy. You may still masturbate, but now with a different consciousness, a different intention. You begin to see it as a mirror for your inner state, a thermometer rather than an escape hatch. And with time, you may notice something unexpected. The automatic impulse begins to fade. Not because the desire is gone, but because it has evolved. Pleasure remains part of your life, but now it is infused with meaning, with choice, with presence. And that changes everything. This shift in your relationship to your own energy also affects how others perceive you. People who are conscious of their energy radiate a quiet strength. They inspire trust. They command respect. They transmit a kind of integrity that goes far beyond surface-level charisma. Because when you stop fragmenting yourself in cycles of instant gratification, you become whole. And people can feel that. This transformation also reshapes your capacity to love. Conscious sexuality cannot be separated from real affection. When you're no longer caught in compulsive habits and artificial fantasies, you open yourself to deeper intimacy. You begin to crave the real touch, the genuine gaze, the presence of another whole person. And in that space, mature love is born. Not the kind that demands perfection, but the kind that grows from shared vulnerability. Jung once said that true plenitude only comes when man and woman become aware of their inner totality. In other words, before you reach out to someone else to fill a void, you must first look inward. Integrate your inner masculine and feminine. Understand your own pain, your own shadow, your own longing and strength. Then sexuality is no longer a quest for relief. It becomes a sacred celebration of two complete beings meeting in truth. Reaching this place requires inner work, yes, but it is also a journey of liberation. Liberation from guilt, from unconscious patterns, from stories you didn't even know you were living out. And above all, this is the path of reconnection with what is most essential to you, your creative energy. We are faced with the deepest question of all. What are you choosing to create with the energy that dwells within you? Because that very force, the same one you once spent in silent, repetitive cycles, can now give rise to something greater, truer, and more lasting. This brings us to the conclusion of this journey, which is, in reality, only the beginning of another deeper one, the journey back to yourself. Along the way, we've come to understand that masturbation, when viewed through Carl Jung's lens, reveals far more than just a simple physical act. It becomes a mirror of the unconscious, a symbolic reflection of how you engage with your desires, your frustrations, your fears, and most importantly, your own vital energy. We now realize that the impulse is not the villain, it is the messenger. It points to something within you that needs attention, that needs to be listened to, integrated. We have also seen that repressing this impulse or giving into it automatically and unconsciously are two sides of the same imbalance. True freedom lies somewhere in between, in consciousness, in the ability to pause, feel, reflect, and from there, choose with more presence. You don't have to cut anything out of yourself. What you need is integration. And to integrate is to recognize that within you exists a vast realm where instinct and spirit can coexist, where pleasure and purpose can walk side by side. It is realizing that your sexual energy doesn't need to be hidden or trivialized, but can be cultivated, honored, elevated. By transforming how you relate to pleasure, you are transforming how you see yourself in the world. It is to stop being a victim of your desires and instead become the creator of your reality. It is to move away from the cycle of guilt and reward and enter a cycle of awareness and choice. And that changes everything. Your self-esteem, your productivity, your relationships, your mental and emotional health. Jung showed us that the shadow dominates only when it remains unconscious. But when you shine a light on it, when you look at what you once avoided, when you listen to what you once silenced, it stops controlling you. It becomes a source of power because within the darkness of what you thought was a mistake lies the gold of transformation. Masturbation doesn't have to be a taboo. It can be a portal, an invitation to introspection, to self-understanding, to inner alchemy. Just change your perspective. Ask the right question. What am I really looking for here? And from this question, open the space necessary to listen to the most sincere answers of your soul. If you've made it this far, it's because something inside you is ready to change. And this is the greatest sign of maturity, the willingness to face discomfort, not to run from it, but to understand it, to grow with it, to become whole. After all, it's not just about stopping a habit, it's about awakening. It's about living with more presence, using your energy to build, to love, to create, to evolve. You are not here to hide in the dark corners of your psyche. You are here to shine with all your intensity, aware of your power, responsible for your journey, free to choose who you wish to be. If this content has touched you in any way, subscribe to the channel, share this video with someone who can benefit from this reflection, and continue with us on this journey of self-knowledge, integration, and transformation until the next chapter of your inner journey.